of our packet from yesterday, but Kahoot's always a fun way to start. And I will talk through some of this so that when we get to slides later on, I can just go quickly through them. You definitely need to know which regions of the world are major manufacturers, traditionally, and then how it's changed. Okay, so all of these are traditional except Latin America. Yes, there's a lot of maquiladoras in Mexico, so maybe that's what threw you off. But these, that 13 that you picked, Russia, worries me a little bit. All right, Russia is a major industrial power. Think about all of those places in Russia that you had to write about in your key issue packet. Places like Volga region and the Urals and Moscow, right? Lots of important energy sources and raw materials. Ukraine was a big part when it was a part of the Soviet Union. So Eastern Europe, all of Europe, all right, industrial, East Asia, and of course North America, which includes the Rust Belt area as well as southern Canada. All right, next one. The new global division of labor, right? That the white-collar jobs are staying in the core, and the manufacturing jobs are going to the semi-periphery. That's the new international division of labor. It wouldn't happen without containerized shipping, because you wouldn't send your production facilities across the ocean unless it was cheap to get the raw materials there and get the finished products back. All right? So for those of you that picked industrialization, remember industrialization starts in about 1750, spreads by the 1800s. There were no containers then. All right? So it's changed the way we do manufacturing. It didn't allow for it. Footloose. You're not bulk gaining, you're not bulk reducing. You can pretty much go anywhere. That's what's going on with telecommunications right now. We watched that movie on outsourcing yesterday with all of these call centers going to India, right? They can go anywhere where there's a phone line. And the people speak English, right? But the rest of these are tied. Ethanol will be tied to where they make what? Corn. Cars need to be near the market, so they're bulk gaining. Steel, bulk reducing, near the iron ore, the coal. Back to sectors of the economy. Yes, okay, so you guys are quick, some of you, to jump on anything that says, oh, car. You're not making the car, you're not producing it, it's not manufacturing of the car, it's fixing a car. That's a service. So that's tertiary, okay? Mining would be what? Primary, the dentist. Tertiary, yeah, we could say, what would a dentist be if we were using quaternary or quinary? Quaternary, right? Because it's a white-collar, highly you need an education to do this type of job. The slaughterhouse is the processing of animals. The raising of animals is primary. The slaughterhouse is the processing of them. That's secondary. Pretty good. World systems theory. How do all of these together? How do they interact? Talking about capitalism, right? The core is doing mainly your service sector jobs, your high-tech jobs. They're your creators, right? The semi-periphery is doing more of the manufacturing. The periphery is providing the raw materials. Yes, you can move up, but not everybody's going to climb the ladder of development, right? Certain things about the structure of the economy make it harder for some people, some countries to do so. For those of you that are picking transportation, labor, and agglomeration, what model is this?
It's the new guy. Weber.
Weber, least cost. Good. They all do get mixed up, so make sure you guys refer back to that models with the names list before the AP test. Sometimes called Asian dragons. Yes, that's just a simple one you gotta know. What do we leave off?
South Korea.
South Korea. Go on. Simple definition here, you gotta know it. All right, very good. That's a new word for you, agglomeration. I feel like you guys know it. Let's move on. Everything is produced in the same place. You do the same job over and over again. We've gotten more flexible since then, right? And they do outsourcing because you can use just-in-time delivery to get those parts to your factory. Not everything is made in-house anymore. We are post-Fordist. Special economic zones. I'll be covering more of today. China is known for its special economic zones. These are areas that the Chinese government has declared special so that businesses, production, we're talking about manufacturing, right? Not tertiary, that's why it was the answer. This is about secondary. These companies come to these areas and they get all of these benefits, right? There's tax incentives like this is an export processing zone, so you don't have to pay taxes on what you produce here and export. Obviously, in China, the main reason for going there is cheap labor, right? China also has lower environmental standards than we do here in America. So there's all these incentives for going there to put your products together. Okay, so a break at bulk point is where those intermodal connections happen. That's where you get off the container ship and put the container onto a truck or onto a train, okay? Or it's at the airport. If you've ever driven by O'Hare, have you seen the giant tracks that are on the other side of the airport? Okay, it's not a coincidence. Does everybody know what the rest of these are? Gateway cities are usually coastal cities. They kind of represent entrance to that country. So New York would be a gateway city, Honolulu even, not Denver, right, 'cause it's in the middle of the country. Bulk gaining industries, right? Those are production that gains weight over time, and so tend to locate near the market. That's why we're seeing a lot of U.S. companies move to the Sun Belt. We've covered this in class. They're right to work, so their unions are less strong. They pay people less. That's attractive to companies. Not deindustrialization. That would be the Rust Belt. Not export processing zones. Those are in foreign countries like Mexico or China. And NAFTA, I mean, that would apply to all of Canada, all of the United States, all of Mexico, so not just the Sun Belt. Export processing zone is a region where you are allowed to import raw materials, use their cheap labor, like the maquiladoras, but then all of the products that you make have to be exported back to your home country. They're not meant to flood the local market. You guys need to review Canada before the AP exam. Okay, there's going to be a couple Canada questions. If it regards this unit, you're talking about Ontario. Lots of the industrial production of Canada is happening down here, as far south as you can go. Think about the areas around the Great Lakes. That's Ontario. If you get a question about being French, or anything that has to do with being French, Quebec. If you get anything to do with fishing, everybody know which coast? Right? Yes, over here, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, Newfoundland. If you get anything to do with Asian immigration, yes, we're talking over here. They want you to know the basic geography of Canada. If you get anything about Indigenous people having more rights. Yes. All right, so review that if you don't know Canada. Very good. So where's Liverpool? Yes, it's in the UK. It's in England. It was famous for being an early industrial center, but now not much is going on there. Kind of like Manchester, the Rust Belt, Detroit, all of these places that have lost that industrial base. You guys did well on that. You're definitely not going to go for ecotourism to these places. Very good. I feel like you were listening yesterday. Now, they don't measure technology per se, but remember, technology is used in your production processes. So the amount of technology that you have would influence how productive you are. So it would influence your GNI per capita, but it's not a specific measure. So very good. You definitely need to know HDI, a way to put all those measures of development together. All right, so I knew this would be a hard one. I left it on here even though we didn't talk a lot about dependency theory because it's linked to a lot of these other things. So a lot of you picked the ladder of development. Who is that? That's Rostow, right? The modernization model of how countries develop. Dependency theorists are the opposite of that. So it's okay that you linked them because we talked about them at the same time. But remember, Rostow says everybody can climb the ladder. Dependency theorists say no way. The structure of the world's economy is meant to keep the wealthy countries in the core and the poor countries of the periphery poor because we need their cheap labor and raw materials. Okay? In that sense, it's about neocolonialism. Sure, we don't control colonies anymore, but we still control the world's economy. All right? And so those are linked because dependency theorists say it's still the same situation. It's just not formal ownership of these countries. And so the picture I picked here, right? This is colonialism. I claim this land. This is neocolonialism because now the International Monetary Fund, that's what the IMF stands for, or you could use the World Bank, they help, and they do try to help lesser developed countries get loans, but when they come in there to help, they tell them what they have to do with their economy, reforms that they have to make. So in order to develop and get this money, they're being told what to do. And that's really neocolonialism, because they don't have, the control over their whole economy. Then again, they need the loans, so there has to be strings attached. Just a couple more. Very good. And the next question is linked, so I'm going to go right to it. You need to know the fossil fuels? All right, so pretty good. Maybe you were looking for petroleum. Okay, so oil, petroleum, be able to interchange those. All right, so the fossil fuels are needed for industry, for energy. But burning them releases what? Carbon dioxide, which leads to the warming of the earth. We are trying to bring down those levels by using renewable energy sources, but not everybody's on board, right? And the result is, from the last question, global warming, a rise in sea levels. And the last one. All right, so my picture could have given it away if you knew your geography, but I'm surprised 5 people picked England because we talked about the Industrial Revolution starting in England because of the raw materials that were found there, right? They had an edge because they had coal and they had iron, right? They had a lot of things going for them and they were the first to industrialize. Ukraine, super important because it had so much coal. Russia, think about how big that country is, right? And all the resources found there. The answer is Japan. Japan has been able to industrialize, and during World War II, yes, they took over other countries for their raw materials, but even when those places were stripped from them, they industrialized and developed very quickly. It's really remarkable because they have to import all raw materials. Now, today they don't do a lot of heavy manufacturing, it's more high-tech manufacturing, but still, that they went through the whole process without their own base is pretty awesome. All right, so that's it. Let's see, good job. All right, we're gonna go back to the sheet from yesterday. Do you remember where this picture was? Brazil. Alright, so we finished yesterday with Rostow and Wallerstein, and we just have a brief, I'm just going to kind of skim over some of this other development stuff. I don't expect you to memorize the UN Millennium Development Goals, but you're familiar with almost everything on here already, except maybe we haven't talked a lot about the spread of HIV and AIDS. All of these things, getting rid of poverty and hunger, education, promoting gender equality, bringing down child mortality rates, and helping women have healthier pregnancies and deliveries. We've talked about this stuff. So none of this should surprise you. I feel like if you get one of these development type questions, you'll be well versed in what that means. So don't feel like you have to memorize those. It's just another way, right? What we're trying to do in this section is talk about how to measure development. These goals are important for that reason. On the next page, I skipped over the top bullet point because it's self-explanatory. So I'm going to go to number 3 there, evaluate the role of women in economic development and gender equity in the workforce. Again, I feel like a lot of the gender stuff we keep going over and over. So I put some cool data up here on how this is still true. In America, we don't feel it a lot. In America, I feel like women can do anything that they want, but you do need to recognize that that's rare. And this is a great stat. While young women are more likely to hold a university degree in America, more women go to college and get a degree. So think about the progress that has been made over time. All right? But that doesn't mean that they're getting the same types of jobs. And we have to ask ourselves, what is it about our culture that promotes boys still going into math and science and STEM careers and not girls as much? Right? So you can look at some of that data. Why women, is it just innate? Or do women really, are they trained to stay home with the kids? Mothers are 23 percentage points less likely to be employed. Okay, so obviously it should be people's choice. But there's still societal pressures, right? Gender norms put on people that result in real measurable differences. The gender pay gap, is still around. So these things are all true. Women are less likely to be managers, less likely to be politicians. All right? Why is that? Less likely to be self-employed. So although it's pretty great here in America, I personally have never felt discriminated against, but it's not perfect. And in lesser developed countries, it's far from perfect. They have so much progress to make. So be able to give different examples of how that is and why we should care. All of you should care, boys and girls. Right? We all want development. We all want economic growth. And until every person is able to contribute to that, you're not going to get it. All right. The last thing that was a part of Section B was on microcredit. And we watched a little video on the Grameen Bank. So all you have to be able to do is explain how getting small loans in the hands of poor people can make an enormous difference in development. Right? Give them the opportunity to start their own business. Right? And most of the loans went to women. That doesn't mean all of them, but women were the ones traditionally left out of access to capital and banks. All right? And so I have like 3 or 4 paragraphs written here that you should look over. Remember Muhammad Yunus, he's the guy that won the Nobel Prize for founding the Grameen Bank and getting very small loans. In some cases it says today that average loan is only $200 in South Asia. Sometimes I give my babysitter half of that in one night. Right? We don't have a concept of how such a small amount of money can make such an enormous difference. And what they found is that women really sink that into their businesses and then into their children's education and improving their homes, and their standard of life goes up. So that's microloans. All right. Now we're finally on to part C. Development is a process that varies across space and time. So this is back to kind of some economic stuff. All right, we're on to that next page now. And the first one is analyze the causes and consequences of international trade. International trade, growing interdependence in the world's economy. There are very few countries, in fact none that I know of, that do everything by themselves. There used to be an economic model called self-sufficiency, where you try to develop all parts of your economy yourself, right? And you're closed off to the rest of the world. That doesn't work. The countries that tried that did not have economic growth. So now we're on to international trade. And there's two concepts here that are pretty simple, basic economics that I don't know we ever talked about in class. So listen up and you'll get it. For this first bullet point under number 1, it says, complementarity and comparative advantage are the basis for trade. Don't be scared off by big words. All that means is that countries that, for instance, we produce a lot of agricultural products and we need oil. So you seek a country, you seek trade relationships that complement what you do, right? So if we do this and they do that, that's the basis for trade. All right, it indicates a more favorable prospect for successful trade if you have those complements, right? You're looking for a country that does what you don't do. Simple, right? This is the basis for trade. Comparative advantage is a little bit more difficult. We, as the United States, we're amazing, right? If you had to pick a country to live in at the end of globalization, we could do it. We wouldn't live as well, but we have a lot of good stuff in America. So we would be able to still have a lot of agriculture and manufacturing and services. Not every country would. But the point of comparative advantage isn't that you are the best at everything. Everybody has a strength. So the point here is that you find what you are best at, and other countries do the same. And if everybody does that, and everybody has free trade, we will all have more. All right? So they're giving you the example here of countries A and B that can make cars and trucks. Country B can make more cars. It can make 35 million cars, and country A can only make 30 million. And country B can also make more trucks. If they're only focusing on trucks, they can make 21 million trucks, and country A can only make 6 million trucks. The point is that, yes, country B can make more. So they're like the United States. Like, given a perfect world, we could beat most countries in production. But we shouldn't, because if both countries pick one of those to specialize in, right, and country B picks trucks because they have a comparative advantage, they're much better at making trucks, 3.5 times more productive at making trucks than country A, right? So country B focuses on making trucks, and country A, although sure they don't make as many as country B could, they focus on making cars. The point is, in the long run, there's more made of both. And then if you trade, everybody's better off. I will post this PowerPoint if you want to look more specifically at the graphs, but that's the point of international trade, all right? That you specialize and everybody gets more in the end. All right, so that's basic economics. The next section is about trading blocks. So you should recognize these trading blocks. Ours is NAFTA. What's Europe's? EU, the European Union. Those are actually the ones that are on there the most. I haven't really seen questions on the Arab League. They're usually not on there. It's usually NAFTA and the European Union, so we can focus on that. European Union brought together initially the countries of Western Europe, and it's expanded. The point of the European Union is to create a huge market with no borders, with free trade, and the same currency. It has been wildly successful economically, but because the European Union is more than just an economic union, it's also into social policies, and one of the reasons the British left was because of immigration requirements. Countries are starting to feel like they're being bossed around by the European Union, that they're losing their sovereignty, and that's why Brexit happened. Now, it's probably going to be bad for the British economy, right? But they were feeling like it wasn't working out for them as a country, as a nation of people. And other countries, like Hungary, for instance, doesn't want to take all of these refugees that the EU is saying every country has to take. Hungary's like, no, we're not going to do it. So the EU is being challenged, but it's been economically successful. And I have some stats up there about how the largest economies are so important, right, and have benefited from uniting. All right, so let's take a look at a practice question here. I'll give you a minute. It's on your sheet that you should have open. So I thought this one was kind of tough because there's a couple that seem right. We're looking for one that's not true. Has NAFTA increased trade between the United States, Mexico, and Canada? Yes. Are we expected to have a supranational governing body for all of us? This is the right answer. We would not want to be a part of a super country. That's essentially what you would be creating, right? It's arguing that there's going to be a governing body, not just free trade, but a governing body, kind of like the European Union has with the European Parliament. That's not something the United States is interested in. This is about trade. It's not about uniting politically in any way. But the one that almost got me, this is true, and this is why Trump has been so mad about it, because he says he can make a better deal because we have a trade deficit. But this one is hard. The movement of tertiary sector industries. I don't know. Most of our services, to my knowledge, haven't gone to Mexico. Tons of our secondary have. But that one threw me off a little bit. But technically it could happen. It's free trade, right? Free trade, so sure. Those industries could go to Mexico easily. And I think that's the point of the question. It facilitates, right? It may not have happened in large numbers, but it could happen. And it's not supposed to include other Latin American countries. All right, so let's move on. Interdependence issues. I'm like, wait, that's not right. Interdependence issues. So because of globalization, we're all connected, right? So something that happens in our country is going to affect the rest of the world. And we've seen that lots of different times. So on here it says, interdependence concerns include the global financial crisis. All right, there's been a lot of them, all the way back to the Great Depression. That affected the entire world. Maybe affected World War II. Falling oil prices. Maybe you remember the housing bubble a couple years ago where all of our home values were kind of inflated and then they crashed. The ripple effects of that spread throughout the world. So the point is there that we are all connected, and it's a good thing, right? Globalization and trade and the ease of that is good, but it doesn't come with no negatives. When something negative happens, it affects everybody. Imbalance in consumption is also on here. The imbalances in consumption patterns. So essentially, you know this, right? Countries of the core, more developed countries, we have a smaller population than lesser developed countries, but we use way more of Earth's resources. That's what they mean by imbalances in consumption patterns. We also waste more. We have more pollution. And I have just this example of food up here. Think about all of the food that you throw away. I feel like when I clear out my refrigerator before garbage day, I kind of feel sad about it. I didn't eat that asparagus. Oops, I didn't finish those leftovers. Right? In America, it's just this land of plenty. Our serving sizes are way too big. And so waste is a part of that. The imbalance in consumption, I think, is kind of obvious. All right, so we're moving on to economic restructuring. So this is the International Division of Labor, the new International Division of Labor. We've already talked about outsourcing. We've talked about how there's been a decline in manufacturing jobs in more developed countries. And in the US, that has led to jobs going to Mexico, especially to East and Southeast Asia, or if it stays within the United States, to the Sun Belt. So economic restructuring means all of these cities and areas of the country that were hard hit by those job losses, what are they going to do? How are they going to restructure? They need retraining. They need high schools that stress STEM classes and education so that they can work in some of the higher tech industries that are still around. Don't forget automation and robots. It's not just outsourcing and offshoring. It's also our super fancy technology that is causing economic restructuring. So that's a big deal. That's kind of why I have this machinery picture there in the background. On the next page, I do talk a little bit about the Sun Belt and how places within the United States have been affected by economic restructuring. All right, in the next section, the thing that I wanted to pick out here, and I talked about yesterday in my class, are newly industrialized countries. Sometimes, or maybe, they like to put maps on the AP test and say, what are these? Or like dot distribution maps, what crop is grown here? Or grass, you know, whatever. And so my fear is they'll put this on there and you'll be like, I don't know. So if you looked at this map, would you recognize that these countries are newly industrialized? Maybe you would now, right? You do have Brazil, India, China on here. What's left off from BRIC? Russia, because Russia isn't newly industrialized. It's a rising economic power again. But all of these countries, Mexico, South Africa, Turkey, Indonesia, the Philippines, they're all doing more manufacturing now. Newly industrialized countries. It's good for their economy, questionable for ours, but we are getting cheaper products. It's just causing economic restructuring and job loss. All right. So on the next page, they want you to have examples of maquiladoras, special economic zones, and free trade zones. I think maquiladoras we've covered enough, right? Mexico, manufacturing going across the border, and this is a picture of where they were clustered. Initially, they had to locate within, I think it was 25 miles of the U.S. border. And you see all these clumps because they were export processing zones. Everything that they made had to go back to the U.S., export processing zones. But now, because NAFTA has opened up trade, you can have maquiladoras everywhere. So that's just a dot distribution map showing maquiladoras. Here are special economic zones that you saw in Kahoot. We already talked about why they went to China. There were 4 initial ones back in the 1980s that were special economic zones, and they did so well that China has continued that program. And they stretch now, you know, all along the coast of China, and you even have some border cities. Now these are not meant to service shipping in like the United States, but Southeast Asia, all right, and other countries, right, the border ones. So they're giving special incentives to come to China and do your manufacturing there. Special economic zones. Think cheap labor, less environmental restrictions. And lastly on that sheet is free trade zone. So this is something we haven't really talked about. A free trade zone is an area where goods, whatever is produced, whatever is being traded, can be imported, held, and then re-exported without customs, without taxes. So they often are entrepots, like Singapore, for instance. They call it the world's warehouse. It's just kind of like a holding point for those items. And maybe like when you're in an airport and it's like, what do they have, those duty-free shops kind of things? That's also related to this. Some famous ones though, Hong Kong and Singapore are the ones that come to my mind. I wanted to show you this one in Poland. I had never heard of this before. Here it is. So you can think of like a shipping entrepot, right? A spot where things can be held and imported, exported, or just held in the warehouse for other ships to come pick up. I never knew about this one on the Baltic, so I had to look that one up. All right, let's do the practice question. Because we don't have a ton of time left, and we want to yell out the answer? Hey! All right, let's go on. So this is the last little section in Part C, Rise of Service in High Technology Industries and Growth Poles. So as our economy changes, we've become more developed. We want more services. We want better education. We need more health care as our population gets older. We have more money for tourism. Our economy has shifted from secondary to tertiary. The rise of service. That's us. Okay? There are some manufacturing jobs still here, of course, automated ones and ones that are high technology. So this is what's going on in America right now. Growth poles are these innovative, technologically advanced industries that are agglomerated in certain spots. Silicon Valley is one of these, okay? They stimulate economic development in other businesses. So they're basic industries that attract non-basic industries to come there and make that area really successful, really lucrative. And so like the most expensive place to live in America is actually in San Francisco because of Silicon Valley. Actually, that's a little bit further north, but it still goes. All right, so STEM we talked about, science, technology, engineering, and math. This is a huge focus in America now because we know that this is the way the economy is going. All right, and Silicon Valley has all of that agglomeration of those really smart, techie, software, computer engineer people. They're there and they have access to capital. All right, so it is the world's most famous technopole. Here they are. Take a look there at San Jose. All right, the South Bay portion of the San Francisco Bay Area in Northern California. Lots of startups. They used to make silicon chips, but eventually now it just refers to all of the high-tech businesses and 1/3 of all venture capital investment. That's a ton. 1/3 of all that venture capital is going to Silicon Valley. Here it is. San Francisco area. Right? Here's San Francisco. Silicon Valley is a little bit south of there, San Jose. All right, but when I say San Francisco, that's what comes to my mind. So it's all right there, Northern California. All right, the other one that was on here is Research Triangle Park. You have Duke, North Carolina State, and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, all right there. So if you're thinking of a technopole, a place where there's a lot of technology and research and development going on, think about universities too. Right? They attract that type of talent. And that's one we hadn't mentioned in class. We're not going to go over this because it was presented in this unit already. They already had an FRQ on Silicon Valley. And notice capital, labor, government, agglomeration, all words you need to be familiar with. That one, answers to that one will be posted. Okay. Last thing about the Sun Belt here in this section. Why now is the Sun Belt expanding? Other than what we talked about in class yesterday, I never mentioned air conditioning. It's kind of funny, but I would never want to live in the South unless there was air conditioning. And so once air conditioning became available, it was more appealing. Of course, we've already talked about the lower taxes and lower wages that exist there, the right-to-work states. But modern technology and air conditioning actually helped a lot. The other thing that I wanted to say here, it says government initiatives at all scales may help promote economic development. That means that the government gets involved and sets policies that help certain regions develop. And that's what they did for the Sun Belt. So I wanted to give you an example. During World War II, the federal government invested $9 billion in the South. The South has always lagged behind the North in terms of development. And so they built defense plants there, shipyards, oil refineries, chemical plants. This was government spending that stimulated development. Out west, they built major dam and power irrigation projects, aerospace industries. And so think about how the government's role and the government's investment in an area can help development. All right, so there's not too much left to say on sustainable development. We've been talking about it a lot. And I know that the bio teachers have done a good job, and I asked them to years ago to make sure they teach you the ecology piece before the AP exam. Have they?
Yeah.
All right, so a lot of this stuff you guys have learned already in bio. Economic development that is conducted without depletion of natural resources. That's sustainable development. Ask yourself, can I do this over and over again forever? If so, it's sustainable. Taking care of the planet, we're not going to watch the video. Oh, climate change, right? So we have a lot of dependence on fossil fuels, and global warming has resulted in the melting of the ice caps. We're able to get ships through there now. Remember Russia digging to the bottom, well, going down under the ice and planting their flag on the bottom of the North Pole? What do they want that's under there? Oil, right? Those natural resources. So the last couple things here. Yay, we're gonna finish. Is ecotourism. And we've talked about this in my class a little bit as we look at awesome pictures of the day. Ecotourism is tourism directed towards exotic and threatened locations that are beautiful, natural environments. But you can't just go there and be like, this is awesome, it's so beautiful, and then like throw your trash and drive your Jeep and like destroy the area. Right? The point of ecotourism isn't just to see beautiful places, but not to leave a footprint when you do so. So I love this quote. Leave nothing but footprints, so you're not leaving any trash or anything behind. Think about footprints on a beach. Take nothing but pictures. Kill nothing but time. This is ecotourism. And it's a way, especially for lesser developed countries, like Costa Rica, for instance. What are they famous for with ecotourism? The rainforest zip lining. You can go on a zip line and enjoy the beauty of nature without destroying the rainforest, right? And they make a lot of money in promoting that. And that's the point of ecotourism. Let's do, actually I just kind of gave you the answer to our last practice question. National parks in Costa Rica. And at the end of your packet, there should be practice questions. Can you scroll for me? Sample questions. I'm going to put the answers up right now, and you can jot them down, or if you can stay a couple minutes and not look at the screen, and you want to answer them yourself and then check, I'll put the answers up, and that will be your prerogative. Thank you for coming. This was the last review session.
Yes! Oh!